Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of BizzTalk Africa. I'm your host, Jason Schuster. I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Vidya Mike. How are you doing today, Vidi?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well. I was sick a little bit earlier in this week. I still can't smell anything.
I could hear it. Yeah.
But overall, honestly, I'm feeling a lot better, so I'm ready for today's show.
Fantastic. And today we
have David Sime. How are you?
Sime.
Yes, Sime. I'm very good, thank you. Very good. No, don't worry. Yes, it's been a long and interesting week. I've had a lot of coffee, so I'm feeling great.
That's right. Lots of coffee. My coffee's right here. It's not quite coffee, but it's it does the trick. So David's here with us from his company. It's Riot Digital, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Riot Digital, and we are talking about mass adoption of VR AR, which is a super cool topic for me with my gaming background. Vidya is a VR person as well. She was showing off her VR stuff earlier today. So, but before we get started, David, can you tell us a little bit about you? Tell us your story. Where do you come from? What brought you to where you are now?
Okay, potted history. There's quite a lot of variation actually, because it's been quite a turbulent and varied career path that I've been on. But I've been in communications, particularly digital communications, for about 21 years now. And
Wow.
I started out in things like marketing and then quickly moved into digital marketing, because marketing is about 70% research and maybe 30% promotion if you're doing it right. And what I liked about digital was, and it was a new thing at the time, was that you had access to information on your users, on your viewers and stuff, and it was instant and it was unfiltered and it was free. So I loved that. So I got right into that. But back then, 20 years ago, like late 90s, people were willing to read a lot more, because they were, they'd just come away from books and newspapers and they were still into long form content. So, and also because of the restrictions of the internet and so forth, text takes less time to download, right? But as time went on, connection speeds went up and attention spans went down. We had to kind of start moving in the direction of more and more image-based content and a lot less text.
Right.
And this trend continued, right? So I ended up moving in the direction of social media. I ran a few companies, used that for promotion globally and so forth. I've also got a strong interest in psychology and sociology and so forth. So I was really interested in these emerging trends. And even images, if a picture speaks 1,000 words, it still wasn't enough. So I ended up moving into video content, which was fine. And I started a company called Online Corporate Video Production, Encore Video. And that's what we did. We did really heavily analysed video content, worked out what worked, who it was meant to go to, what social media channels, what kinds of content, and then refined the process. That was fine. But then it got to the stage where even that wasn't working as well, and the market was becoming flooded. So again, with my background in psychology and neuropsychology, I thought, well, what's the natural next step? The natural next step is interaction. The natural next step is immersion and 3D, because that's what we're built for. That's what we evolved for, or we're put in the earth for, depending on how you look at it. So I started a company called Encore Reality. Now, that company managed to have the success of Encore Video within its first month and rapidly outstripped it because there was so much demand. Then I was approached, I spent a bit of time in lecturing and so forth, and I was then approached by an industrial consortium to start a company called Riot Digital, which is realities in IoT. So it's combining the Internet of Things, gathering sensor information from, let's say, an oil platform, viewing it and visualizing it in virtual on augmented reality. Virtual reality is the fully immersive stuff where that's all you see, and augmented reality is, you'll be familiar with it on your phone, like filters and so forth, where you're seeing the real world with a digital overlay. And that's really useful because you can have somebody look at what we call a digital twin, a 3D model of an asset from a distance, let's say on land, and again, you've got a platform or a wind farm in the middle of the ocean. They can see what's going on there from the IoT sensors. They can see if something's going wrong or heating up or vibrating too much. And then they can send somebody who's there locally wearing his augmented reality headset to go and have a look at it. And he can see, okay, that thing's overheating. Here's a little arrow. I just need you to turn this manual valve 3/4 of a turn to the left. Is the pressure and the temperature going down? It is. Okay, we're fine. Previously, that would have required the expert on land to fly out and get offshore, and they shut down the asset for the entire period that takes. So all the price of that person, the number of time it takes, the insurance, the cost, the weather conditions, and so forth, and all the value that you lose because it's shut down is avoided, because it can be done like that. And we've been using that in also for training and things like that in Nigeria, for even like using augmented reality to train people in things like welding, and in Ghana, and we're introducing various kind of forms of training and digital twinning like that, using these kind of low risk, low cost, very high realism solutions.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, heck of a journey to where you are now, and doing some really cool stuff.
So
It's a fun industry to be in. I've never had more fun in any industry. Every day is an adventure.
but David, and I think I looked at your background, and your trajectory is so much like a lot of people's. You started off in marketing, you studied marketing and all this kind of stuff, right? But like the traditional way of marketing and what's available, it's impossible without embracing technology.
Yeah.
And you've done that, right? You've pulled it in. And I think you've successfully sort of merging those two disciplines, because it's not about, and I like that word you use, right? In terms of actually how you describe AR versus VR, and what a consumer could get from both of them, how you actually read them, and how you sort of engage them. And I think with COVID, people saw the need for that more and more, because Facebook just wasn't doing it. That sort of social thing wasn't doing it. People want to actually be immersed in another reality rather than the nightmare that we're living in now, or before, when you had lockdown.
You raise a really interesting point, actually, because you're totally right. I would say that the progress that we've made with Riot Digital, which is only just about a year old, is easily 5 years worth of progress in 1 year. Partially because we're not traveling around to have meetings, we can have them like this. Partially because the need and the requirement, both at a consumer and an individual level, from a social perspective, to the business and the commercial and industrial level, which has been shut down by the lack of movement and so forth, has been so high. But the other thing is, we need it from as I mentioned, I'm interested in psychophysiology and neurophysiology, and
Exactly.
we are wired to live in a 3D world. We're wired
Yes.
for three-dimensional immersivity. And that's why this kind of thing, great as it is for presentations and so forth, is so tiring. Because I was talking to a senior lecturer about this morning. When you're in a two-dimensional environment, your brain is having to convert that 2D into 3D, which in itself is tiring. Also, I'm looking at you, Vinny, I'm looking at you, Jason, I can see your faces simultaneously. When you're in a room and you've got loads and loads of people, your brain is taking in all of that information, all of those expressions. We're not built for that. We're built for viewing maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people simultaneously, and usually just one. So it's tiring, it's taxing on the brain. That's why when you haven't been socializing in ages, you'll have been finding this coming out of lockdown. It's really tiring because you're using a great big bit of your brain for all that social interaction. In virtual reality, you can behave like you can in a normal room. You can walk up to somebody as one-to-one. You can have
Funny
a normal
you should say that. Funny you should say that. Before the end of this program, we're going to run a video, because we are, into this as well. And I would be very interested to hear your views, David.
Okay.
But we'll see if we can. We'd love to get your views on that.
Awesome.
But what we will do for audience, we will put it in this, put a link in, so that everyone could actually play it at their own time. One question I have for you. Sorry, David. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, some of the independent research that's been done on this subject by PricewaterhouseCoopers, a guy called Jeremy Dalton, is that the retention in virtual reality education, we've created some virtual reality education systems that will work on really any device, not just headsets, that the retention rate is 4 times higher, or 4 times as high as Zoom training. The fatigue level, when you ask somebody when they've been in a Zoom classroom or a Zoom meeting, how long have you been in, they always overestimate. It always feels like longer because it's so tiring. You put them in a virtual reality environment and you ask them 3 hours in, how long do you think they've been here? Almost always they'll say 20 minutes. Because
that
it's
is so interesting. You're
know, right?
immersed into it, right?
Ah,
And this is the power of the whole metaverse and where it's headed. This is why everyone is sort of, like all about this metaverse world now, right?
yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, you're removing for practical training, which you can't really do like this. You can put people in hazardous practical environments like working at heights, working in confined
Indeed.
spaces, train them safely before they ever get let loose on the real world. So it
Yeah,
increases, it reduces risk, and it increases the likelihood of them doing the
absolutely.
job right first time.
You made reference to sort of using it on a rig because obviously in the North Sea you can't have anyone falling off these rigs or what it would look like. So that's really interesting. Tell us a little bit about what you did with that.
Well, what we're working on at the moment actually is, again, things like practical certified training, like working at heights, like, things that have actually got certifications at the end of them that actually make people fit to work in these environments, which is still quite rare.
Wow.
And and it means that we can put people, and this is something that you'll have encountered, Vidya, because you've used, and you both will, in fact, because you've used virtual reality. If you're high up in a virtual reality environment, you feel like you're high up. It triggers vertigo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
So
this is when I went to Universal and you had that, like I think it was a Spider-Man ride or whatever.
Oh
I
yeah,
did
yeah,
not
yeah.
move. You swear you were falling off that building. And
God.
it's like everything you feel, even if they splash some water onto you, all of a sudden this becomes your reality. It's
Yeah.
amazing what it does.
Well, what happens normally in normal training is that when you're working at heights in an oil derrick or offshore or whatever, not only do you have to go through your offshore training, escaping from a submerged upside down helicopter in a swimming pool, which I never want to have to do, but you go out there, and then for the first time you're going through all this expensive training and onboarding and so forth, but then you're put in a position where you're up high. Then we discover whether or not you can handle it. And a lot of people can't. Like 30% of people go, no, this is too much. They lock up and they can't do that job. Now, not only is that not safe, but it's also wasted a lot of time and money for the recruiter, for the industrial organization. With virtual reality, you can put them right in that environment from day one. Now, some people are good at faking it, though. Some people can put a face on it and go, I'm absolutely fine, when inside they're terrified. But if inside they're terrified, they're not using their big old prefrontal cortex. They're using their tiny little fight and flight amygdala, right? So they're not really very good for making rational decisions, right?
Right.
So you need to make sure that not only is the person not looking frightened, but then they're not frightened and hiding it. So therefore, we use other technology, which does EEG. It basically scans your brain.
So how their brain's reacting to it.
So they look cool as a cucumber, but they're freaking out. And then you can train them up so that they're more used to it.
On that topic, though, you could actually do it so much earlier, right? So when kids are studying, before you actually engage into something, it might seem nice on paper, like you could pass the exams, like I could pass the exams, right? But I couldn't do some of it. Like I have qualifications, I'm like, I couldn't do it to save my life or to save anybody's life. But you don't know it at the time because, that theoretical knowledge, which is testing your retention, your ability to understand, your IQ and stuff like that. It's actually not testing the other parts of your brain, which is as important, if not more, into how you are going to react in a particular situation.
Absolutely. And the way that we learn is that we learn by doing. Theoretical is good, but I created some content for the Modern Apprenticeship Scheme here in the UK. And the issue is that with Modern Apprenticeship Scheme and the research that I did on the students was that certain types of people, most people, learn better with a little bit of theory, followed by a little bit of practice to cement that knowledge, to put it in context, followed by a little bit of theory. But that's not how it's delivered, because just logistically, you've got a bunch of people in a classroom who are hundreds of miles away from ever actually activating the knowledge. So they forget most of it before they ever go there. So what you can do with virtual reality is say, okay, theoretically, here's what you're meant to do, and here's what you're not meant to do. Now go and do it. And then you come back to the theory and you realize why it's important. And that retention of this blended learning between theoretical and practical is so much higher. And this can be applied to learning. It can be applied to, again, marketing and advertising and just general information gathering and retention. But also what's quite good is you can put different stakeholders from an organization like finance or engineering into the situations that they never would have been in, so that they can really experience it for themselves, so that they can learn what an everyday life is like for an on-the-ground engineer. even though they work in an office thousands of miles away. If they have that better understanding, it leads to better communication. It leads to more reasonable demands because they can see what a normal working day is like without ever having to physically get them there.
Wow.
Amazing. You know, even though this is not a 3D call right now, I just looked up and look at the time, and I'm thinking, how did 20 minutes pass? This topic.
Every day is an adventure because it moves so fast, and I don't try to invent everything. It's just not possible. The demands and the technology move far too fast. So I'm meeting new specialists from new different companies every day. So I never feel like an expert because every day I'm like, oh, there's a whole new thing. I'm an amateur again. But it makes things so interesting. You know, I would say that my brain feels like it's got younger since I've started doing this because it's constantly working out new things. So now I've got a kind of a brain of a 12-year-old instead of a 45-year-old, you know, because it's just this constant learning, which I think is just vital for everybody. You know, it keeps your brain young, keeps life fun, you know.
Wow. I love it.
So what, and because you have all this exposure, what are you seeing as the trends for next year? What do we have to look forward to in this space? And I'm looking at Jason because he's like, you just took my question.
Yep. That's okay. Good day, I can have.
The answer is if you ask me, Jason. So, Jason, that's a very good question.
Oh, yes, indeed.
So, what I would say is the trend for next year is, depending on how things go, and there's a lot that we can't predict, but if lockdowns do start to raise, and if we do go through a smooth transition back to the capability of doing things as we did them before, we won't, but if it became possible, there will be more travel, there will be more physical presence and so forth. So what we're looking at is this hybridization of everything that we've done over the previous year with how we would like to make this work best as we're going forward. So what we're going to see therefore in the technology is less full-on virtual reality, well, the same amount of full-on virtual reality where that's all you see and you can do it from anywhere in the world, but an increase in the augmented reality. And this has been borne out by the technology that's developing as well. Previously, augmented reality was limited. That's the one where you're overlaying digital content on the real world. Previously, that was phone only, or maybe a HoloLens was a big bulky device, you know, and really expensive, about $2,000. But now there are devices hitting the market, many devices hitting the market, which look like this.
Yeah.
And you power them with one of these, so they're cheap because you've already invested in your phone. You already got a phone.
So this is just a monitor.
Yep, it takes the weight. You just attach a cable to the glasses. The glasses do something called waveform reflection. So it basically projects on the back of the lenses, and you see an overlay onto the world around you, and that's you. Now you can use that. We're using that with ATEX, like explosive environment helmets and so forth, like a heads-up display like you see in Top Gun, you know. And it's full color, and it gives all that information. It connects to the internet.
I've got a new invention.
Okay, go on.
Do you know those kind of visors people are using for COVID? Yeah, you see, you could have a face shield with VR.
That's brilliant because then you could use a FLIR camera and check out whether the person's got a temperature or not. So you can back right off on them, yeah?
Look at that.
Well, actually, funnily enough, those are quite like welding helmets. And one of the augmented reality applications that we just rolled out in Nigeria is training people in welding on, it's a real welding rig, so it feels right. You develop your muscle memory and everything, but your welding helmet is your augmented reality visor.
Amazing.
I know. And so you can do welds and it will guide you if you're doing it wrong, and you can look in at it in ways that you can. Massive savings on waste of metal and gases and so forth. Dramatically increases the time. Obviously, you do need to finish off your training doing the real thing with the real equipment, you know, and real, you know, MIG, TIG, TAG welding, whatever. But it reduces the first bit of it by about a third of what it would normally be, and it dramatically reduces the waste. And that's the same thing. You're taking what you would normally be wearing, bike helmet, welding helmet, whatever, and then just augmenting it, adding to it.
Tino, I mean, for trades, the only way you get better is practice. Everything.
Yeah.
Now, trades is that, but imagine somebody who is doing surgery on a human being. You really don't want to practice like that. But your first operation is always a practice. But to have something like this that sort of you have that muscle memory, you develop that muscle memory and that internal calmness.
Yes.
When you think about it, the risk associated with it, the stress on the individual to perform as well, all of that just starts to go dissipate, right? A little bit.
You couldn't
It's
be more right. I mean,
amazing.
think about driving. Anybody is obviously has ever learned to drive. When you're learning, it's terrifying, right? And then once you get used to it with the practice, it ceases to be
It
terrifying.
does not cease to be terrifying in the United Kingdom. No, this is, like you have these roundabouts, you buy a fast car and you can't go beyond 20 miles per hour because, you can't, there you go.
Certainly gets easier though. I used to be, my heart rate was through the roof whenever I got behind the wheel, but now I'm relaxed, which means
Nice.
that when unforeseen consequences, like somebody cuts you up or, you start to slide, more of your brain is free to deal with that.
Exactly.
Yeah, because all the rest of the stuff you've developed, I mean, they call it muscle memory. It's obviously it's a misnomer. It's going on in the physical control bits of your brain, but they're taking over, leaving your decision-making bits free to handle the more complicated stuff. And this applies across the board. So why not do that training in a risk-free environment? It doesn't feel risk-free, as we know. If you're high up in a virtual reality environment, you're just as terrified, right? So it doesn't feel risk-free, but it is risk-free. So you can go through all that training wherever you are, and then when you get into the real high-risk situation, you're far less likely to mess it up because you're used to it and you're calm.
I love this. Now, I am going to ask a question that might be difficult, so I'm going to take Videa's spot now. All right.
Yes.
How does this tie into Africa? Where is Africa on the adoption scale when it comes to VR, AR, and how is it impacting Africa specifically?
It's actually in a very rapid adoption curve. And part of the reason for this is that the various countries that make up Africa have local content obligations for external organisations like Shell, Exxon, Chevron, you name it, who to take on a minimum percentage of local workers, right? So they're not just coming in, bringing in a bunch of their workers, building some infrastructure, and then leaving again, because that's no good for the local economy. So usually the requirement from the governments of these countries is you have to use a minimum of, let's say, 50, 60, 70% local labour. However, the skills that are required for that are quite intricate. So you might have a large number of, I'll go back to the welding example, you might have a large number of welders, but the kind of welders that you have are trained in automotive welding or engineering welding. They're not maybe trained for the kind of welding that you need and the skills that you need and the safety that you need for working in an oil and gas environment or an offshore environment. So therefore the training requirements are incredibly high. And I mean, in terms of numbers, you're like, we need to train 60,000 people by next year in this country alone. Really high, right? So trying to do that traditionally is extremely difficult. Trying to do that in the midst of a pandemic or in the fallout from the previous year's pandemic, impossible.
Right.
So how are they going to do it? How are they going to do it? Virtual and augmented reality, because then it's possible you can get people working. And we've again been working on stuff that doesn't require high expense equipment. The equipment's getting a lot cheaper, don't get me wrong. I mean, you can get headsets for 200-300 quid these days, but that's still a lot of money when you're rolling it across like 60,000 people, right? So we've tried to, from the outset, make sure that the technology, or rather that the software, will work on far cheaper locally produced hardware, and therefore if you have a phone and you have an internet connection, then great. If you don't have an internet connection, fine, we'll fly out a SIM card for a few pence, and then you can just we'll get you patched into whatever network happens to be nearby. It doesn't cost you anything. You can do your training. And not only that, but the training is being monitored and checked by the HR department, by the safety people. That person has done that training at that point to that level in a way that no classrooms required, no clustering of people in, heavy viral situations. I mean, I remember it was Botswana that were, originally said to us, we need you to help us train 500,000 school children without them all having to go into schools. And that was what originally sent me down this line. We'll create a virtual reality classroom that will work on any device, and we'll make sure it can be accessed from anywhere, from home, and it doesn't cost the student a penny. And that same approach has been usable and replicable right across Africa. And as I say, out of all the continents in the world, and out of all the combinations of countries in the world, I would say the adoption in Africa is possibly in the industry being faster than anywhere else.
Wow.
Simply because of the locations and the scale of the continent.
Wow.
That's pretty crazy. I mean, it's one of those things. Before we started this show, that statement would have totally shocked me. But we've talked to so many entrepreneurs and people doing really innovative things in Africa that when you say that VR's adoption curve is actually, ahead of everybody else, actually, yeah, I believe that.
Makes sense, doesn't it? And again, this is part of the journey of learning. Things make sense in context, right? Now you got the context to make sense, but it does. There's few other countries that have that requirement. The only one that I can think of that has anything approaching that requirement is Canada. And the First Nations in Canada, who many times, I don't know if they call them reservations in Canada or not, but they are far, far out, middle of nowhere. And again, Canada has an obligation to make sure that training has been made available to First Nations, and quite bloody right, quite frankly. But it's very, very difficult to get that kind of training to these areas simply because the connectivity isn't there. And so, again, I'll be working with companies in Canada to say, okay, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to use your low Earth orbit satellites that good old Elon is putting up over North America. We'll be able to bounce the signals off those using something called a backhaul network in 5G. And that way, no apps, no updates, no nonsense, no expensive equipment. You just hook in with your computer, bounces the information off a satellite, the groundwork's done elsewhere, and everybody has access to the kind of training that I'm talking about. Scaffolding was scaffolding erection was the main one that we were asked about. So that's similar, and that's again the kind of technology. Once the new satellite constellations, the ones that are much nearer Earth and have lower delays, once they spread further south, because they're mostly in the very northern hemisphere, but once they get further, Africa is my next target for that.
Fantastic.
Beautiful. Okay.
Version 2 of this has to happen.
That?
We need to have you, David, back on again in a couple of months' time. So we want to the trajectory of where this is going, because this is it's a huge change. Because even if people are allowed to travel again, I suspect because they were forced to adopt technology and they get more accustomed with it, people are asking the question, well, you know what? Family time is really important. Mm-hmm. Traveling takes a lot of time, right? Away from, I think like lifestyle means more to folks now that they, sort of spend more time at home and understand the quality of life a little bit more.
Yeah.
When people travel, they would probably prefer to travel for holidays rather than for work. It's going to be more for question. So I think like what you're doing is going to gain more popularity, and people might have been scared to sort of embrace this, but it's going to move forward so quickly, because this is the world in which we live in.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we definitely have to have you back on the show, because we haven't even talked about entertainment. We haven't even talked about entertainment in this context. So
that's a whole other world.
It's a whole other world. So David, thanks again for joining us on the show today, and maybe just like 30 seconds, final thoughts for the audience that you want to leave them with.
Final thoughts: don't be afraid of the new technology. Try it, play with it. It's just like any other new technology. The change is happening. The change is going to occur. You're going to love it. You're going to have a lot of fun with it. There's loads of stuff you can access for free. Everything from filters on YouTube or Snapchat filters, that's augmented reality. So if you've done that, you've used augmented reality, don't worry about buying expensive hardware. You can do virtual reality on cheap hardware on normal machines like you're using right now, and just play with it. Familiarize yourself with it. Get away from that fear side, because it can do so much for you.
Wow. I love it. Perfect. David, thank you again so much for being here today. This was an awesome topic. I absolutely loved it. Loved having you on here. So thanks for your time. And as always, Vidhi, thanks for being such a wonderful co-host.
I've just switched on my Vive. Like I feel inspired now.
That's perfect. Okay. We're out of time. So until next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Have a good one.